The shuttle touched down on the icy plain with a hydraulic sigh, the soft thump of landing gear muffled by thick snowdrifts. A faint shimmer of steam curled upward where the ship's heated hull met the cold atmosphere of Glacior Prime. The hatch hissed open, spilling out artificial light onto the frozen crust. From within the rounded, vessel-marked glassosset, figures emerged, bundled in thermosuits designed for non-native physiology. Mira Thorne stepped forward last. She stood out not for her height or build, both modest, but for the bare feet that met the ice without hesitation. Frost crackled beneath her soles, yet she didn't flinch. In her left hand, she held her boots, slung casually over her shoulder with her heavy expedition coat. Her stride was confident, her expression unreadable behind wind-tangled auburn hair. The alien students parted instinctively, their wide-set eyes blinking behind heat-filtered visors. One muttered in a chirruping tongue that her translator hadn't yet parsed. Above them, the sky was pale turquoise, thin clouds skating fast across a distant sun. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning the new arrivals for contamination or emotional instability, standard protocol on an interspecies campus. They lingered on Mira a fraction too long. Dean Vrexel stood rigid at the base of the docking stairs, ringed by hovering monitors and security bioforms. His form shimmered slightly, like jelly under pressure, a cephalanoid in academic robes held up by an internal scaffolding system. His 4 eyes narrowed with visible distaste. "The human is unshod," he remarked to his assistant, who emitted a series of distressed clicks. "She's walking on unsterilized glacial substrate," Ktharn added coldly, voice filtering through a mask designed for methane respiration. The Arcturan's pale, ridged skin pulsed faintly with thermal overlays, and his antennae twitched with alarm. "She appears unconcerned," Vrexel muttered. "Worse, she appears comfortable." Mira reached them and nodded politely. "First breath's always the best," she said, exhaling a puff of fog. "Smells like real snow, not that 4-refrigerant mix on Titan." "You grow this naturally?" Ktharn's antennae recoiled. "We do not grow snow." "Not what I meant." "Never mind." Vrexel floated a little closer, tilting one eye down at her feet. "Miss Thorne, Glacier Prime maintains a stabilized -31°C surface temperature. Are you deliberately courting cellular necrosis?" Mira looked down, wiggled her toes in the slush, then back up with a smile that teetered between amusement and challenge. "Where I'm from, this is mild. My skin's adapted for flash frost, and my blood chemistry neutralizes subdermal ice crystals. We used to swim in colder water to train for icequakes." "You swam in it?"
Sure.
"Had to, really. Earth's got some cranky weather patterns. Besides, I figured this might help your students see what a Deathworlder body can tolerate. Consider it an outreach demo." The assistant next to Vrexel let out a shrill warble of concern. "We do not conduct demos without proper peer review," Vrexel snapped. "You'll follow standard campus safety protocols going forward." "Understood." Mira pulled the boots back onto her feet, but left the coat slung over her shoulder. "Didn't mean to stir up panic on my first hour." Despite her calm tone, Mira could feel the weight of 100 alien gazes pressing into her back as they resumed movement. She could smell the nerves behind their sterilized equipment, the quiet hum of judgment. This wasn't going to be easy. By the time the group reached the tram station, Mira had cataloged 7 different species among her peers. One cluster of bioluminescent gas beings floated in an oxygenated tank, 2 crystalline bipeds clicked with voice replicators, and several aquatic shapes swam inside upright pressurized suits. Only one other student bore a form remotely similar to hers, a lithivore named Crawl, with eyes like obsidian pearls and skin like molten rock hardened into plates. As they settled into the warm cabin of the tram, Crawl leaned toward her with a slow, grinding curiosity. "You have no dermal overlays. No climate sheath." "Nope," Mira replied. "And yet you suffer no trauma?" "Nope." "Fascinating," he said, as if examining a glitch in reality. "You are either genetically exceptional or catastrophically misinformed." Mira grinned. "Maybe both." The tram hummed to life, winding through canyons of crystal spires that seemed to hum faintly with their own internal frequencies. Glacior Prime wasn't barren, just cold. Life teemed here if you knew where to look. Thick moss under ice crusts, wind-carved tunnels harboring sound-reactive fauna, and strange silver vines that fed off atmospheric charge. Mira had read all the papers. She'd also read between the lines. Most of the researchers had never risked leaving the dome-controlled labs. When they arrived at the residential compound, Mira was led to a solo habitation pod, standard issue for species with pathogen-variant metabolisms. The pod smelled like sterile air and ozone. A welcome message blinked across the wall in 36 languages before defaulting to English. She stood silently for a while, eyes fixed on the ice-glazed mountains just beyond the reinforced window. The glass vibrated slightly in the wind, but not enough to matter. She leaned forward, pressed her hand to the pane, and felt the cold leach into her skin. It reminded her of home. Back on Earth, her acceptance into the Interstellar Academy had been met with disbelief. "They don't take humans," her mother had said, frowning over the jagged ridges of a wind-scarred desert. "They study us like zoo exhibits. Why volunteer to be the freak?" "Because someone has to," Mira had replied. "Might as well be the freak who knows what she's doing." Now here she was, alone among the galaxy's most cautious minds, trying not to be an anomaly while being exactly that. Her personal terminal pinged. Orientation briefing. 0600 local cycle. Field hazard protocols included. Dress appropriately. Mira snorted. She was beginning to suspect the warnings were less about safety and more about avoiding diplomatic incidents. Too late for that now. She glanced down at her feet, faintly pink, barely numbed. Still working fine. As night fell, the landscape outside shifted from pale blue to deep violet, lit by 2 moons that rose one after the other like eyes opening in the dark. The academy behind her shimmered under atmospheric shields. Inside her pod, Mira sat quietly, boots beside her, coat folded on a chair. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photo, her family wind-burnt and squinting under a blood-orange sky, standing on cracked salt flats. She whispered, "Still the weird kid in the room, huh?" The ice moaned softly outside, as if in answer. The lecture chamber resembled a cathedral carved from frozen quartz, with columns of refractive ice stretching upward and light drones gliding silently above. Dozens of students occupied staggered alcoves along the walls, suspended in various environmental control fields, pressurized bubbles, nutrient tanks, thermal cocoons. In the center, Mira Thorne sat alone on an unshielded platform, legs folded beneath her and breath fogging in the chill. She wore no gloves. Her boots were off again. Dean Vrexel hovered near the central lectern, his translucent mantle shifting in muted disapproval. "Today's topic," he announced, "is extremophilic physiology and adaptive evolution. Specifically, the paradox of organic survivability in conditions considered universally terminal." Several nodules glowed green in agreement. From the left wall, a ripple of bioluminescent flickers translated to, "A comparative analysis will be adequate for hypothesis recalibration." Vrexel's eyes shifted to Mira. "Miss Thorne, would you kindly refrain from destabilizing the classroom's thermal equilibrium by exposing your dermis to the substrate?" "I'm not destabilizing anything," she said calmly, curling her toes against the frosted metal. "I'm demonstrating passive adaptation. You wanted a living example, right?" Thorne, standing near a floating hollow map of exoplanetary biospheres, made a sharp sound like snapping ice. "Your stubborn exhibitionism is not a scientific demonstration. It's a biological anomaly bordering on recklessness." Mira smiled faintly. "To you, maybe. On Earth, I'd be considered average. In fact, I failed my cold resistance trials. My brother once hibernated in a snow cave for 3 days with only a thermal blanket and a glucose strip." The room shifted slightly. Some students responded with wordless data pulses. Others simply stared. One aquatic being released a plume of ink inside its sealed tank, a gesture of confusion or awe. Vrexel rotated toward her slowly. Perhaps you would care to elucidate how your species' environmental tolerances exceed even our most evolved cryophages? Mira stood, brushing frost from her uniform. Because Earth didn't evolve with its life forms, it tested them. Continents shifted, oceans boiled, skies choked. We didn't have the luxury of adapting slowly. We adapted violently, constantly, or we died. There's no algorithm for that kind of pressure. Crawl, the lithivore student with stone-laced joints and a crystalline voice, leaned forward in his magna-stabilized seat. You mean your evolution favored volatility? Not just favored, depended on it, Mira said. Our entire biome is a tug-of-war between catastrophe and resilience. What you see as erratic, we call instinct. Most humans don't realize how hardwired we are until we're dropped somewhere like this. Ktharn moved to a nearby console, tapping spindly fingers across a translucent interface. A 3D projection of Earth rose beside Mira, spinning slowly, highlighting deserts, volcanic ridges, storm-battered coastlines. These conditions are statistically hostile. Toxic air zones, predator density, tectonic instability. You should not exist. Yet we do, Mira replied. And we don't just survive, we explore, colonize, re-engineer. Not in spite of our instability, but because of it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was data being digested, translated, reframed. Several students began logging notes or syncing their memory implants. Crawl emitted a low resonance, the lithivore equivalent of a thoughtful sigh. She is not anomalous, he said finally. She is illustrative. Vrexel's mantle darkened slightly, a sign of internal conflict. Be that as it may, her methods remain unsanctioned. Hydration sampling without filtration, unshielded skin contact, refusal to log vital signs in real time. These are not acceptable academic practices. Mira tilted her head. You don't learn anything new by repeating what's safe. You learn by seeing what breaks, and how fast. Vrexel hissed softly, but Crawl's voice broke in. Would it be permissible to conduct a co-observed resistance trial? Voluntary. Controlled. Ktharn turned toward him, brow ridge lifting. You're proposing a joint biological hazard assessment between a Deathworlder and a lithivore? That's reckless. That's science, Mira said. Eventually, Vrexel floated backward. Very well. Under Academy supervision, a limited trial may be conducted. No further spontaneous acts of barefoot diplomacy. Understood. Understood, Mira said, slipping her boots back on but leaving them unlaced. The chamber dimmed as the lecture ended. Students began dispersing into their protective spheres and pods, retreating into private airlocks and thermal tunnels. Crawl moved beside Mira, his footsteps grinding softly against the crystal floor. Do you enjoy provoking them? He asked, tilting his rocky head. I enjoy watching their assumptions shatter, Mira replied. It's a good start to building something better. Or to getting expelled. I've been through worse. Outside, the sky had shifted again, a deep violet streaked with electric blue auroras drifting over the jagged peaks. Mira walked beside Crawl through the ice garden courtyard, where thermal vents kept strange alien flora alive, crystalline flowers, steam-thriving vines, pulsing orbs rooted in mineral-rich soil. Why did you really come here? Crawl asked. To show them we're not just anomalies, she said. We're a valid branch on the evolutionary tree. We're not accidents, we're survivors. He nodded slowly. That may be the most threatening idea they've heard all cycle. Mira paused by a bench carved from translucent stone. She looked down at the frost clinging to her bootlaces, then up at the twin moons. Good, she said. The tremor struck just before dawn. At first, it was a subtle thing, the vibration in the floor that barely registered over the usual low hum of geothermal regulators. Mira stirred in her bunk, instinct already firing before full awareness caught up. She slid to her feet, grabbing her jacket but not bothering with boots. Her toes met the icy floor with practiced familiarity. The cold wasn't what made her pause. It was the silence. Glacior Prime was never silent. There was always the wind, the whine of turbines, the alien hum of life pulsing just under the surface. But now, The air had gone still, held in breathless tension. Then the impact came. The Eastern Research Tower folded into itself with a groan like a dying glacier. A plume of frozen mist and fractured crystal shot skyward, followed by a chorus of alarms blaring in mismatched languages. Mira lunged for the comm on her wall, but the screen was already flickering. Static. Power reroute failed. Emergency lines overloaded. She was halfway into the hallway when the floor beneath her shifted again, this time a deep lurch, not enough to topple her, but enough to scatter two alien students struggling with their suits. One of them, a photosynthetic being wrapped in a refractive mesh cocoon, couldn't stabilize its energy envelope in the chaos. It collapsed, convulsing, its color dimming rapidly. Mira dropped beside it, fingers already assessing pulse equivalence, breath output, suit integrity. The cocoon had been ruptured by a falling panel. Unfiltered atmosphere was leaching the creature's stored light. "You're going to be okay," she murmured, sealing the mesh with the emergency wrap from her jacket. "Just hold on." The creature blinked a sequence of yellow, fear, confusion, pain. She stayed with it until its trembling slowed, then turned to the other student, who stood frozen in place, overwhelmed. "Don't stand there. Help me get it to the med locker." "But the protocol says we must wait for retrieval." "There's no time. Either we move now, or your friend dies." Which part of that sounds like a rule worth following? The student obeyed, and together they carried the injured alien into a reinforced passage leading toward the base med bay. As they ran, Mira passed scenes of half-collapse, shattered walls, ruptured coolant lines, drones malfunctioning midair. Smoke curled from the lower archives. And still, no command channel updates. She reached a split in the corridor. One path led to safety, the other toward the collapsed research wing. Crawl was supposed to be in that wing. Mira hesitated for exactly one breath, then turned toward the ice and ruin. The way was treacherous. Debris crunched under her feet, and sub-zero drafts clawed through exposed seams in the structure. At one point, she had to crawl through a fallen bulkhead, its metal still radiating residual charge. She emerged into what used to be the biology annex, now an uneven crater studded with jagged frost. "Crawl," she called. A faint grinding sound answered. She climbed down, slipping on glassed ice, until she found him pinned beneath a fractured equipment rack, his stone-hardened legs trapped, glowing faintly with stress fractures. "Your timing," he said weakly, "is suspiciously convenient." "You always say that when I save you," Mira replied, digging through debris. "You always save me when I specifically request not to be. Next time I'll bring a clipboard and a consent form." She braced herself and lifted the rack. Crawl's rock-armored frame was heavy, but his eyes, dark and molten, focused on her with a flicker of gratitude. He tried to stand but faltered. She slung his arm over her shoulder. "Come on. We're getting out of here." Most would have evacuated. Most aren't me. They moved slowly, every step deliberate. The building groaned under the weight of collapse. An overhead pipe burst in a hiss of vaporized gas, and Mira threw herself forward, shielding Crawl with her body. Her skin blistered slightly from the heat, but she kept moving. By the time they reached the emergency shell zone, several drones had reactivated. Dean Vrexel stood at the center of the control swarm, mantle flickering with stress markers. When he saw Mira emerge carrying Crawl, he stiffened visibly. "You disobeyed direct instruction to remain within safe corridors," he said. "I didn't get any instruction," Mira answered. "The network was down. I made a judgment call. You exposed yourself to multiple Class B hazards and retrieved one injured student, one unconscious energy being, and stabilized 6 others while your automated systems rebooted." Crawl coughed a laugh. She also insulted protocol in at least 3 dialects. Vrexel's expression glitched, then recalibrated. "Your actions, while unorthodox, were effective." "Call it what it is," Mira said, settling Crawl into a med seat. "It was survival. You've all built this world to be pristine, efficient, controlled. But it's still a planet. Still wild underneath. Sometimes you need chaos-trained instincts to adapt on the fly." Dr. Cthorn approached slowly, his antennae twitching. We underestimated your threshold for situational recalibration. You thought I was reckless, Mira said. I'm not. I'm just built for impact. There was a long pause. The wind howled against the walls, carrying with it the sound of distant structural scans and emergency drones restoring order. Rexel inclined his head. Miss Thorne, while your methods remain problematic, your efficacy in crisis management cannot be denied. We will revisit some of our assessment models. Good, Mira said, pulling on her jacket again. Because this place isn't as stable as you think. She turned to leave, pausing only to glance at her boots near the threshold. Then, almost defiantly, she walked past them barefoot again. Behind her, Kral watched with a fractured grin. They're never going to get used to that, you know. Let them try, Mira said, not looking back. Outside, the ice cracked under her steps, but she didn't break stride.